There are places where the air feels different. Not cold exactly, not warm, just wrong. Like the space itself is holding something back, waiting for you to notice it too late. Gyms are supposed to be about the living, the grind, the sweat, the discipline of turning a human body into something stronger than it was yesterday. Fluorescent lights, rubber floors, the rhythmic clank of iron on iron. It's one of the most aggressively physical environments a person can be in, which makes what happens inside some of them so much harder to explain. The 3 stories you are about to hear were reported by real people. 2 of them gave permission for their accounts to be shared. 1 insisted on anonymity, and the details have been adjusted to protect that request while preserving the facts that matter. All 3 were investigated, cross-referenced, and corroborated by at least 1 other witness. None of them have a clean explanation. Not a single one. People have tried. Maintenance workers, paranormal investigators, a building historian, and in one case, an actual licensed psychiatrist, all took a swing at what happened in these places, and every single one of them walked away with more questions than they came in with. So, before you dismiss any of this as imagination or coincidence or the kind of thing people say when they want attention, consider this. The man in the first story was a personal trainer with 8 years of experience working late-night shifts across 4 different gyms. He was not excitable. He was not prone to exaggeration. His manager described him as the most level-headed employee she had ever supervised. He left mid-shift one night and never went back. That's where we're starting. Story 1 takes place at Meridian Fitness, a mid-sized gym in a converted warehouse building on the eastern edge of a mid-sized city in the American Midwest. The building itself dated back to the 1940s and had housed a number of different businesses over the decades: a textile factory, a storage facility, briefly a church. By the time Meridian moved in around 2011, the building had sat empty for close to 7 years. The gym occupied the main floor. The basement, which was accessible through a heavy reinforced door in the rear corridor near the men's locker room, had been sealed during renovations. Management decided early on that the cost of bringing the basement up to code wasn't worth it, so they poured a new concrete threshold, bolted the door from the outside, and stopped thinking about it. Marcus had been a personal trainer at Meridian for 3 years when things started. He ran the late shift, 5 in the evening to 1 in the morning, 4 nights a week. He liked the quiet of it. After 10 or 11, the gym usually thinned out to a handful of regulars, and by midnight, he was often completely alone, finishing his own workout while he waited to close up. He first noticed the sounds in February, a low rhythmic thudding from somewhere behind the men's locker room wall, consistent, regular, almost mechanical. He assumed at first it was the HVAC system acting up because the building was old and the heating was always doing something strange. The pipes in that section of the building ran close to the surface and had been known to knock and groan during temperature shifts, and he logged it in the maintenance report and didn't think about it again for 2 weeks. Then one night in early March, Marcus was restocking the towel station near the locker room entrance when he heard it again. But this time it was louder. And it wasn't thudding. It was footsteps, not shuffling or settling. Actual footsteps. The distinct heel-to-toe rhythm of someone walking a slow circuit inside the locker room. Measured, unhurried, like a person pacing a space they knew well. Marcus checked his phone. It was 12:43 a.m. The last member had signed out at 12:19. He was alone in the building. He pushed open the locker room door and swept the space methodically. Empty. Every stall, every shower, every bench, every corner. He checked behind the row of lockers near the back wall. He checked inside the supply closet. He stood in the center of the tiled room for what he estimated was 2 or 3 minutes and heard nothing but the background hum of the ventilation and his own breathing. He walked back to the front desk and told himself the building was old and old buildings made noise. He told himself that 4 more times over the following 2 weeks, each time a little less convincingly. But here is where the story stops being easy to rationalize. 3 nights later, Marcus was in the rear corridor near the bolted basement door when he heard something that stopped him cold. From somewhere below the sealed concrete threshold came the unmistakable sound of a treadmill running. Not a treadmill motor idling or warming up. A treadmill at a full walking pace, the belt turning steadily, the mechanical rhythm completely consistent and completely impossible in a space that had no power, no lights, and no treadmills. Marcus stood in that corridor for 11 minutes. He checked the time afterward because he couldn't believe it had been that long. He stood there listening to the mechanical rhythm of something running in a sealed basement and could not make himself move toward the door or away from it. He was not a person who was easily frightened. He had worked alone in an empty gym after midnight for years and never once felt anything he could describe as genuine fear. He described what he felt in that corridor as something different from fear, something more specific and harder to shake. The certainty that whatever was making that sound was not running on the treadmill the way a person runs on a treadmill. It was running to let him know it was there. When it stopped, the silence that replaced it was the kind of silence that feels louder than noise. The ventilation system, the distant hum of refrigerators in the lobby, the ambient sounds of a large building at night, all of it suddenly conspicuous in the absence of the sound that had been filling that corridor for 11 minutes. He went home that night without finishing his shift. He told his manager his stomach was bad. She didn't ask questions. What happened next is what pushed this story from unsettling into something genuinely disturbing. A week later, a member reported that one of the full-length mirrors in the men's locker room had what looked like a smudge on it. Marcus went to clean it with the standard glass spray and microfiber cloth he kept under the front desk. When he got close enough to see the smudge clearly, he stopped walking. It wasn't a smudge, it was a handprint. Not on the outside of the mirror, where a towel or a shoulder or a palm pressing for balance might leave one naturally, but on the back of it, pressed against the glass from inside the wall cavity behind the mirror's mounting surface. The mirror was flush-mounted, sealed against the tile with adhesive brackets. There was no accessible space behind it. The wall behind that mirror was load-bearing concrete with insulation packed between the studs. The only thing beneath that wall was the sealed basement and approximately 4 feet of concrete floor between them. There was no physical way for a hand to have pressed against the back of that glass from inside the wall. Marcus stood in front of it for a long time without touching anything. He photographed it from multiple angles, then called the overnight maintenance number and reported a structural issue that required a crew to investigate. He used the word structural deliberately because he did not know how to describe what he was actually looking at in terms that would result in someone taking it seriously. Management sent a maintenance crew to investigate 2 days later. They removed the mirror from the wall mount and found nothing unusual behind it. No cavity, no gap, no smear or residue on the wall surface that would indicate how the print had appeared. They inspected the concrete, found it fully intact, and remounted the mirror. They noted in their report that the print was likely a manufacturing artifact, It's something transferred during the original installation, and that it had no maintenance implications. Marcus photographed the print before they took the mirror down. He photographed it in natural light and with a flashlight angled from the side. The print was adult-sized, fully transferred, fingers splayed wide, pressed hard enough that the oils had saturated the surface area of the glass completely. It was not a smear or a partial. It was a deliberate, flat-palmed impression. It looked, he said later, exactly like someone pressing their hand against a window from the other side. Not in distress, not trying to break through, just pressing it there, slowly and intentionally, to make sure it would be seen. He started leaving his personal phone propped in his locker with the camera running during his shifts. He positioned it facing the locker room door through the narrow gap he left in the locker door, the kind of angle that looked accidental if anyone checked, but captured the full entrance clearly. He did this for 3 weeks before he captured anything he couldn't explain away. On a Tuesday night in late April at 12:51 a.m., the camera recorded the locker room door opening slowly on its own, not swinging from an air pressure change, not pushed by someone walking through, opening steadily and deliberately, about 14 inches, and then stopping. As if someone had pushed it open and paused in the doorway, deciding whether to come in. No one came through. No one was visible in the gap. The door held open at that precise angle for 47 seconds, and then swung shut, slowly. They're the way a door swings shut when someone controls it from the other side. 14 seconds after the door closed, the lights in the locker room cut out. Marcus was not in the room when it happened. He had been restocking the equipment rack near the free weight area. He watched the footage the next morning sitting in his car in the gym parking lot before his shift started, watching it on his phone screen in the early morning light, and he described feeling something shift inside him. Not shock, not disbelief. Something quieter and more permanent, like a door in his own mind had opened 14 inches and stopped. He worked 3 more shifts after that. He told himself each time he could handle it, that whatever was happening in that building happened whether he was there or not, and in that understanding it was more important than running from it. On the last shift he would ever work at Meridian Fitness, he arrived at 5 in the afternoon to find every bench in the free weight area turned to face the rear corridor. Not knocked over, not displaced. Turned, all of them, with deliberate parallel alignment, all facing the direction of the sealed basement door 60 feet away. The angles were precise enough that Marcus took a photograph and later used a protractor application on his phone to confirm that all 7 benches were oriented within 2 degrees of the same exact bearing. There were no cameras covering that section of the floor. No one had entered the building since the previous closing manager locked up at 10:30 the night before. The doors had remained locked. The security log showed no entry events. Between 10:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. the following day, something had moved through a locked gym and turned 7 benches in perfect alignment toward a sealed door. Marcus photographed the benches, called his manager from the parking lot, and never went back. But his manager's reaction is what changes this story from one man's experience into something that can't be dismissed as individual perception. She told Marcus she believed him. She told him this quickly, in the way people speak when they've been waiting to say something for a long time. She disclosed that 2 previous late shift employees had resigned without explanation from the same facility. One of them after reporting sounds in the rear corridor, the second after finding equipment repositioned during a morning opening that matched no movement logged on any security record. She told him that the maintenance team had noted unexplained equipment repositioning on 3 separate occasion reports spanning 2 years, and that every single incident had been attributed in the official record to settling or structural vibration because no one had wanted to write down what it actually looked like. Nobody had connected the incidents before Marcus. Nobody had been there long enough or paid close enough attention to see the pattern. A paranormal research group connected to a regional university heard the account through secondhand sources 6 months later and began a formal inquiry into the building's history. What they found confirmed what Marcus had suspected from the moment he heard the footsteps in that locker room. The basement of that building, the sealed, powerless, and cement threshold basement beneath the locker room wall, had been used between 1962 and 1971 as a private exercise facility by the owner of the textile factory that had occupied the space during that era. The man had been deeply private about his fitness regimen, preferring to train alone in the hours after his workers left for the day, often staying past midnight. He had installed a treadmill and some basic weight equipment in the basement space at his own expense. According to a single interview found in a 1972 local newspaper profile written after his death, his former assistant described him as someone who treated exercise as a kind of ritual, the same movements, the same hours, the same basement, every single night without exception for nearly a decade. He died in that basement in 1971 after collapsing during a late-night workout, alone, as always. His body wasn't discovered until the following morning, when a factory worker arrived early and noticed the building lights had been left on all night. There is no rational thread that connects a man who died alone in a basement 50 years ago to a handprint pressed against the back of a sealed mirror, or benches turned in perfect alignment in the dark. The research group could not provide one. The building historians could not provide one. The engineers who re-examined the basement threshold during the investigation found no structural explanation for how sound could travel from that sealed space to the corridor above in the way Marcus had described. They found the treadmill, though, still down there in the sealed basement, disassembled and pushed against the far wall, rusted past use but recognizable. The same treadmill that the factory owner had installed in 1963, still there, still present, in the same basement where a man spent 9 years exercising alone in the dark and then died doing exactly what he always did, at exactly the hours he always did it, because no one would have thought to check on him until morning. Marcus has one more thing he has never fully explained in any interview. When he photographed the handprint on the back of the mirror, he noticed something he did not mention to management and did not report to the research group until they asked him directly, months later, whether there had been anything else. In the lower right corner of the glass, barely visible unless you angled the flashlight at exactly the right degree, someone had traced 4 letters into whatever residue had transferred to that surface, and the letters spelled H-E-R-E. Not a word written for the benefit of someone on the outside of the mirror. Written like the handprint from the inside. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. This channel covers paranormal and horror content every week, and there is a lot more where this is coming from. Now let's talk about what happened at a 24-hour gym on Grover Street. Story 2 is different from the first in one important way. It was documented. Not professionally, not officially, but documented nonetheless, by a woman named Diane who has since moved out of the city and asked that her last name not be included here. Diane was a regular member at a 24-hour gym chain location, the kind of fluorescent lit, I always open facility that caters to shift workers and insomniacs and people who need to exercise at 3 in the morning because their schedules don't give them any other option. Diane worked nights at a hospital. She went to the gym after her shifts, usually arriving between 4 and 5 in the morning, often the only person in the building except for the overnight attendant at the front desk. She started noticing things in August, small things at first. The feeling of being watched in the weight room, which she attributed to the fact that she was a woman alone in a gym at 4 in the morning, and that feeling is not paranormal, it's just an unfortunate reality. She ignored it. Then the equipment started behaving strangely. Treadmills she had not touched would be running when she arrived in the cardio section, set to low speeds, in belts moving in an empty room. She mentioned it to the overnight attendant, a college student named Joe who worked the desk to fund his degree. Joe shrugged and said the machines sometimes defaulted to a diagnostic cycle. Diane accepted that and moved on. Then the front door alarm started triggering. On a Wednesday night in mid-September, the gym's entry alarm went off 11 times between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Each time, the system registered the door as opening. Each time, Joe checked the entrance and found it closed, locked from the inside during off hours, no one entering or exiting. The system logged every single event. Joe filed a maintenance request. A technician came and found nothing wrong with the door sensor. Diane was not there that night, but Joe told her about it the next time she came in, and something about it snagged on her, in not the door specifically, the timing, 3 to 4 in the morning. She had been noticing that the weight room felt strangest in that exact window. She started bringing a camera, not a professional setup, a decent smartphone on a small Gorilla tripod that she left facing the squat rack while she used other equipment across the room. She told herself she was doing it to prove to herself there was nothing there, that once she had 45 minutes of footage of an empty squat rack, she could stop jumping at the treadmills and start treating the gym the same way she treated the hospital after dark. A place where strange things happen sometimes, and the trick was not to project meaning onto them. She did this for 4 weeks before she caught anything she couldn't explain away. On the 6th Tuesday of filming, at exactly 3:17 a.m., her camera recorded a figure standing at the squat rack. The footage is not dramatic the way horror movie footage is dramatic. There's no static burst, no camera shake, no sudden movement. The figure simply appears in frame between 1 second and the next, standing at the squat rack with its hands on the bar in the precise position a lifter takes before unracking a heavy set. Hands wide, shoulders engaged, body still in that specific preparatory stillness that anyone who has spent time around serious athletes recognizes immediately. It was not standing at the rack. It was about to lift. It stands there without moving for 4 minutes and 22 seconds. No one enters the room before it appears. No one is visible approaching from either side of the frame. After 4 minutes and 22 seconds, it is simply no longer in the frame. It does not step back, does not walk away, does not drop below the camera's sightline. It is there, and then in the following frame, at normal playback speed, it is not. Diane reviewed the footage the next morning at home and felt, she said later, profoundly cold. Not frightened in the conventional sense, not the adrenaline spike of a jump scare. Cold in a sustained way, like something had pressed against the warmth she carried in her chest and held it there until it dissipated. She is a nurse. She has watched people die. She has held the hands of people in their final hours, and she has learned how to be present for the worst things a body can do without flinching. She is not easily disturbed. What disturbed her about the footage was not the strangeness of the figure. It was how familiar the posture was. The position at the bar, the stillness of the preparation, the weight distribution visible even in the slightly grainy footage from across the room. Whatever she was looking at, it had stood at a squat rack before, many times before. The posture was not approximate. It was precise, habitual, the kind of form that only comes from thousands of repetitions. She checked the gym's member log for that night. No one had badged in after midnight. She was the only registered entry. The figure at the squat rack matched no human being she could identify, and its proportions, while human in general shape, were slightly off in ways she struggled to articulate. Too still, the posture, too rigid. The way it occupied space just wrong enough to register in the gut before the brain could name why. She showed the footage to Joe. He watched it twice and then asked her to send it to him, and she never heard whether he sent it anywhere or what he made of it in the end, because he stopped working at that location 2 weeks later. Diane kept filming. Over the next 6 Tuesdays, her camera captured variations of the same event. Not always the squat rack. Once in the mirror, opposite the dumbbell wall, a reflection of a figure that was not present in the physical room. Once in the far corner near the cable machines, a shape that the camera's autofocus kept trying and failing to resolve. Every event fell within the same 40-minute window. Every event involved the same fundamental wrongness of something occupying space that should have been empty. She began researching the building. The gym had opened in 2016 after a significant interior renovation. Before that, the address had been a medical supply warehouse that had operated from 2010 to 2015 with no notable history. Before the warehouse, from 1989 to 2009, the building had housed a physical rehabilitation center attached to a now demolished hospital that had stood 2 blocks east on what was currently a parking structure. The rehabilitation center had treated patients recovering from orthopedic surgeries, cardiac events, and traumatic injuries. The specific work done there was physical therapy, the slow and repetitive process of reteaching the body to do things it had forgotten how to do. Walking again, lifting again, reaching again. The grinding muscle fiber level work of rebuilding physical capacity from nothing. Diane found records through a combination of local newspaper archives, county property filings, and a digitized hospital newsletter collection held by a public library 3 miles from her apartment. She spent 4 evenings going through the material, which is a significant investment of time for a person who worked overnight hospital shifts and needed to sleep during the days. What she found was this. The rehabilitation center had been considered one of the better facilities of its type in the region during the 1990s. It had also been, according to records she located in the county death registry, the site of at least 4 patient deaths during its 2 decades of operation. None of them were suspicious individually. Patients in physical rehabilitation facilities are often medically fragile, and death during or after a therapy session is a documented clinical possibility that anyone in medicine understands. But 3 of the 4 deaths occurred in the physical therapy room, the large open space where equipment was arranged for supervised exercise sessions. And based on the building's original floor plan, which Diane obtained through a property filing, that physical therapy room corresponded almost exactly with the current gym's weight training area. The squat rack sat within approximately 20 feet of where the center of the old therapy floor had been, and 3 of those 4 patients had died between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. During overnight monitoring shifts, when the building was quiet and the staff was minimal, and the patients who deteriorated did so in a particular kind of solitude. Diane sat with that information for a long time before deciding what she thought it meant. She is careful when she talks about what happened next, to say that she is not someone who believes in ghosts in the conventional sense. She is a nurse. She has a very practical, clinical relationship with death and with the human body's limits. What she believes is something more nuanced, that spaces retain something of what happens inside them, that the intensity of physical effort and physical suffering leaves an imprint in ways that science hasn't fully mapped yet, and that sometimes, under certain conditions, whatever is retained becomes perceptible. She does not claim to know what she filmed. She claims to know that what she filmed was real, and that she filmed it in a place where people had pushed their bodies to extremes in the early morning hours for 2 decades, and where some of them had not survived. The final night she filmed, she arrived at her usual time, set up her camera facing the squat rack, and began her workout. She was 22 minutes into her session, working through a set of cable rows on the far wall, when her camera battery died. She had charged it fully before leaving her apartment. The battery had never failed mid-session before. She was meticulous about charging it because she understood that a dead battery meant no footage, and no footage meant no record. She walked across the room to retrieve the camera from the tripod and found it facing the opposite direction from where she had positioned it. It was now aimed at the entrance of the weight room instead of the squat rack, pointed toward the corridor leading to the front desk. She checked what footage had recorded before the battery died. 22 minutes of the squat rack, uneventful, the empty bar catching the fluorescent light, no anomalies. And then, in the final 11 seconds before the battery cut, the camera had slowly and smoothly pivoted on the tripod ball head, rotating from its original position to its new orientation in a continuous motion, as if someone had placed a hand on it and turned it deliberately. She packed her equipment, walked to the front desk, and told the overnight attendant she was leaving. She did not explain why. She canceled her membership from the parking lot and has not returned. What she remembers most, she has said in interviews, is not the footage or the figure or the camera that moved on its own. It is something she noticed when she reviewed the final seconds of that last recording before the battery died. In the frame, captured just as the camera completed its rotation and came to rest, aimed at the weight room entrance, standing in the corridor doorway at the far edge of the image where the fluorescent light gave way to the dimmer hallway lighting, was a second shape. Not at the squat rack, not in the room with her, in the doorway, small and still. And unlike every figure she had filmed over the preceding weeks, which had always been oriented toward the squat rack, or the equipment, or the space of the room itself, this one was facing a different direction entirely. It was facing the camera. Diane has shown that still frame to 6 different people over the past 3 years. She has gotten 6 different responses. A lens flare from the corridor light, a shadow cast by the door frame, a staff member standing in the hallway, a child in the doorway, a piece of equipment she had left near the entrance. She has not identified what it was. She has not found an explanation that satisfies her. What she knows is that from the first Tuesday, she aimed a camera at that squat rack. To the last night the camera turned on its own to face the door, whatever was in that room was always aware of her. And at the end, it wanted her to know that. Story 3 is the one that stayed with me the longest, not because it's the most dramatic, not because the evidence is stronger or the events more conclusively paranormal, It stays with me because of what it does to the people involved. Because unlike a sound in a sealed basement or a figure at a squat rack, this story gets inside a person. It changes them. And the people closest to the man at the center of it are still trying to understand what happened and whether it's actually over. His name, for the purpose of this account, is Ryan. He was 31 years old at the time. A competitive powerlifter with 7 years of competition history and a coaching business, he ran out of a mid-sized private gym in the Pacific Northwest. By all accounts, Ryan was stable, driven, intense in the way serious athletes tend to be, but stable. His training partners, 3 of them, have spoken about him consistently. They describe a person who did not exaggerate, who did not catastrophize, and who, before any of this began, had never expressed any belief in or interest in the paranormal. Ryan switched gyms in early spring. His previous facility had closed due to a lease dispute, and he moved his training and his coaching clients to a newer, larger private gym about 4 miles away. The new gym was well-equipped, well-managed, and by any standard, a better facility than the one he had left. He brought his 3 training partners with him. He set up quickly. He was excited about the new space and said so more than once in the weeks immediately following the transition. 3 weeks after the switch, he stopped sleeping. Not insomnia in the general medical sense, the difficulty falling asleep, or the early morning waking that stress and anxiety produce. Ryan had slept well his entire adult life, 8 hours on training days, sometimes 9, the deep restorative sleep of a serious athlete whose body demands recovery with the same authority it demands nutrition. What started happening was a specific, its repeating event in the early morning hours. He would wake between 2 and 3 in the morning, completely unable to move. Classic sleep paralysis mechanics, the conscious mind awake while the body remained in its sleep-paralyzed state. He was aware of his room, his bed, the window, the ceiling. He could not move his arms or legs. He could not turn his head. And he was certain, with a conviction that did not feel like dream logic or hallucination, that something was in the room with him, not somewhere in the room, at the foot of the bed, standing there. His doctor suggested sleep paralysis when Ryan came in after the 2nd week. The timing lined up with a significant life stressor, the gym transition, the disruption of his training routine, the stress of relocating coaching clients. Sleep paralysis was well documented, well understood, and while deeply unpleasant, was not medically concerning. Ryan was given guidance on sleep hygiene, told to reduce evening screen time, and sent home. He accepted the diagnosis. He is not, by temperament, someone who reaches for unusual explanations when ordinary ones are available. He told his training partners about it, and they suggested he was overtraining and his central nervous system was fried. He took a deload week. He got a new mattress. He downloaded a sleep tracking app. None of it changed anything. Derek, who had trained alongside Ryan for 5 years and knew his behavior as well as anyone, started noticing something at the gym that had nothing to do with sleep and was harder to explain through the lens of fatigue or stress. Ryan stopped going to the corner near the deadlift platforms, and he had done the majority of his own training in that corner for the first 3 weeks after joining. The deadlift platforms there were better positioned, better lit, and close to the chalk bucket and the belt rack he used regularly. He had no stated reason to move away from them, but over the course of about 10 days, Derek watched Ryan gradually migrate his work to other areas of the floor, first moving his accessory work to the opposite side, then starting his main lifts near the dumbbell wall until he was effectively working out as far from the deadlift corner as the gym's layout allowed. When Derek asked him directly, Ryan said the lighting in that corner was bad and it bothered his eyes. Derek looked at the corner. The lighting was identical to every other section of the floor. He did not push it, but he started paying closer attention. Over the following 2 weeks, Ryan's behavior continued to shift in ways that were individually explainable, but collectively unsettling to the people who knew him well. He became quieter during training sessions in a specific way, not the focused silence of a lifter in the zone, but the silence of someone listening for something. He would stop mid-set and stand completely still for 10 or 15 seconds, looking at nothing visible to anyone else in the room. His gaze during these pauses was consistent. He was always looking in the direction of the deadlift corner. Once, during a coaching session with a client, he stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence about bar path mechanics and walked to the window that faced the gym parking lot and stood there for a full minute before returning to the sentence precisely where he had left it. The client was unsettled enough that she messaged Derek that evening to ask whether Ryan was okay. The sleep events had escalated by this point. Ryan was no longer reporting only paralysis. He was reporting a figure at the foot of his bed. Tall, proportioned like a person, impossible to see clearly because his sleep paralysis episodes always resolved before he could reach for a light. He described the feeling of the presence in a specific way that Derek has repeated in several accounts since. Ryan said it did not feel threatening in the way you would expect a threatening presence to feel. It felt interested, like something was studying him the way you study a thing you are trying to understand, with attention that did not waver and did not blink and did not tire. He increased his sleep medication. He moved his bed to a different wall. He began sleeping with a lamp on. None of it affected the presence at the foot of the bed, which appeared regardless of light level, appeared whether he faced the window or faced the door, appeared with the same unhurried consistency it had always appeared, between 2 and 3 in the morning, 3 or 4 nights out of every 7. The photograph from the powerlifting meet is where the story expands beyond one person's private experience and into something that multiple witnesses can verify. Ryan competed at a regional powerlifting event in April. He held in a convention center gymnasium about 90 minutes from the city. He placed second in his weight class with a competition total that was among his career bests. It was a good day by any measure, and his training partners were there to watch him compete. One of them, a woman named Cassandra, who had been in the group for 2 years, took photographs during his attempts on the platform, using a camera with a mid-range telephoto lens. Standard documentation for the team's social media and coaching records. When the photographs were reviewed that evening over dinner at a restaurant near the venue, Cassandra scrolled through the deadlift attempts and found the one from Ryan's third pull, his best lift of the day, and passed the camera around the table. The photograph showed Ryan mid-lift, the bar at mid-shin, his back engaged, his face tight with effort. Behind him, the competition platform was surrounded by a packed spectator area, rows of folding chairs and standing room along the back walls, the ordinary busy backdrop of a regional meet. Every person visible in that spectator area was watching the platform, watching Ryan, watching the bar, watching the judges, watching the movement that was happening in front of them. That is what people do at a powerlifting competition. That is the only thing worth watching. Except one figure standing near the back wall of the spectator section at the left edge of the photograph, where the image began to lose definition. This figure was not watching the platform. It was facing the camera, not Ryan, not the lift, the camera, oriented directly toward the lens from a distance of approximately 30 feet. Its face was not visible in any useful way, because background subjects in that focal range were significantly blurred. But its orientation was unmistakable. Its body was turned perpendicular to the platform, toward Cassandra and her camera, in a spectator area where every other person was turned toward the competition. Derek asked Ryan to look at the photograph. Ryan looked at it for a long time without speaking. Derek watched his face during that silence and has described what he saw as a specific kind of recognition. Not surprise, not fear, but recognition. The expression of someone seeing something confirmed that they had already suspected. Ryan asked Derek to delete the photograph. Derek said he would. He kept it. He sent it to the other two training partners that night with a message asking whether anyone else saw what he was seeing. All three of them did. 3 days after the photo was taken, Ryan opened his locker at the gym and found something inside it. His locker had a combination lock that only he knew. It had been closed and locked when he left the previous day. He was certain of this because he was methodical about his equipment and always double-checked the lock before leaving. When he opened it on that Thursday morning, sitting on top of his training bag was a piece of chalk. Gym chalk, the kind used for grip on heavy lifts, commonplace in any serious training facility. The problem was that Ryan didn't use chalk. He used lifting straps exclusively and had for years. He had never owned chalk and had never kept any in his locker. The chalk block sitting on top of his bag was new, unused, and had no business being there. He did not tell anyone about the chalk. He threw it in the trash can near the deadlift platforms and did not mention it until 3 weeks later when everything came apart. The final event happened on a Friday evening during an open training session when all 4 of the group were present, along with several other gym members. Ryan was halfway through his training session when he stopped in the middle of the free weight area and began shaking. Not trembling, shaking, full body, the way a person shakes in extreme cold or in the aftermath of a bad car accident. He did not fall. He did not lose consciousness. He stood in the center of the gym floor and shook and stared at the corner near the deadlift platforms where he had been avoiding for weeks. Derek reached him first. He described Ryan's face as completely blank, eyes open, eye present, but not present in the way a person is when they are processing something beyond what the available reality can explain. Derek put his hands on Ryan's shoulders and said his name twice before Ryan looked at him. What Ryan said, in a flat and even tone, was that there was someone standing in the corner. There was no one standing in the corner. Ryan was taken to a hospital that evening, along with 2 other gym members who had been standing close enough to him when it happened that they both reported experiencing what they described as a sudden, overwhelming dread, physical, nauseating, a sensation that something terrible was about to happen, and they needed to leave the building immediately. Both of them did leave. Both were shaken enough that someone drove them to an urgent care facility as a precaution. All 3 were physically fine. Ryan was evaluated by a psychiatric team and given a diagnosis that his training partners still dispute privately. Not because they think he's mentally unwell, but because the diagnosis doesn't account for the photograph or the chalk or the 6 weeks of progressive behavioral changes or the 2 other people in that room who felt the same thing at the same moment from 15 feet away. Ryan took 3 months away from training. He came back to a different gym. He coaches again and competes occasionally, and by all external measures, he has returned to something like his previous self. He does not discuss what he saw in that corner. He has been asked by his training partners, by his psychiatrist, by a paranormal researcher who contacted him through a mutual acquaintance. His answer is always the same. He says he doesn't think talking about it is useful. He says that some things are better left in the room where they happened. The gym on the other side of the city where all of this took place is still open. The corner near the deadlift platforms still exists. People train there every day without incident. As far as anyone can determine, the building has no notable history, no deaths, no unusual events before Ryan's experience, nothing in any public record that would suggest an explanation. Which means that whatever Ryan saw, whatever followed him from that corner into his apartment and into his sleep, and into a regional powerlifting meet 90 miles away, and into his locked locker on a Thursday morning, it did not come from the building. It came from somewhere else. And as of the last time anyone in his circle heard from him about it, he has no idea where it went. 3 gyms, 3 sets of witnesses, 3 stories that started in ordinary places with ordinary people doing ordinary things and ended somewhere that none of them expected and none of them entirely got back from. The trainer who heard a treadmill running in a sealed basement and found letters pressed into a mirror from the inside. The nurse who filmed 6 weeks of evidence in a weight room built over a place where people died, learning how to use their bodies again. The powerlifter who carried something home from a gym that watched him from the back of a competition crowd. None of these stories have conclusions that satisfy. There are no experts who have signed off on a definitive explanation. There are no institutions that have investigated and issued findings. There are just people who went to the gym, the most mundane possible destination, and came back carrying something they didn't go in with. If you want to keep going, there's another video on screen right now. Real cases, real accounts, no clean endings. See you there.